You're listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast series that syndicates for the A-List Online, and my name is Andrew Mackay-Smith. Hope you're well. The interview subject prepared for your listening pleasure today is Gaba Wright. He's a Sydney-based musician, and he has a brand new album out for 2019 called Afterhours. So let's have a listen to what he has to say. Here we go. Hey mate, Andy Mackay-Smith calling for our chat. How you going?
Hi, good, thanks. How are you, mate?
Good, man. Yeah, good. Yeah, a bit of my night of interviews, your second cab off the rank. So it's good to talk to you. I've certainly enjoyed After Hours, that's for sure.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks again for having me as well. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's all good, mate. Yeah. So it's, I've had a good listen to it, I've got to say, because I've had it for, it must be a couple of weeks now. It feels like I've had it for a couple of months, but that's not the case. I think I've just listened to it a lot. So, and look, Here's what I think, okay? So tell me if you think I'm on point or not, and correct me if you feel you need to, but obviously it's synth-lated. But what I like about it, it's bass-driven hard pop with plenty of nods to the best parts of music from the 80s. So there's a sound there that's similar to the Killers, really. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, definitely, I'd say one of the biggest inspirations in terms of bands would probably be like the Killers type of soundscape.
Sweet, yeah, and I couldn't help but notice too, mate. You have been a student at the conservatorium, so you actually know what you're doing. You know your way around a fretboard and around some keyboards there. So this is, is this? Are you a bit unique insofar as a lot of the people at the con? I know they go in and people do graduate and go and perform and play contemporary music, but is what you're doing, is it very different to what a lot of your graduating class was doing?
I'm doing like a degree that's sort of centered around sort of composition and sort of technical based stuff like sound recording, producing, writing music for ads and whatnot. So yeah, I'd say like potentially a bit different in regards to the class that I'm currently in. But there's also a contemporary degree, which I think is quite new as well at the con. But there's quite a lot of people in that doing stuff, pursuing their own careers and everything independently and whatnot. But yeah, besides that, I'd say potentially.
What got you into doing what you're doing here?
I think mainly just sort of growing up in a household centered around music, getting exposed to like a really wide array of different, influences and things that, really inspired me to keep writing music, learning different instruments and stuff, and then realizing one day that I could just combine all that and sort of work on my own stuff. Yeah,
and the other thing too is your vocal. Not so much the tone, but the way you deliver the lyric. It reminds me of Brian Canham from Pseudo Echo, so please take that as a compliment, because I think he's an extraordinary artist.
Yeah. I've got to I'll check him out. I've not heard of him before, but no, definitely, cheers.
Yeah, Pseudo Echo, when I was a kid, so I'm 41, but in the 80s, I don't know whether there was a bigger band in Australia from the perspective of pop music, and they're still around, man. They're still around and kicking, and they still sound fantastic. So just check out the YouTube clips, and I think you'll know what I mean. I mean, they're definitely more focused on the pop side of things than what you are, insofar as they're not using traditional instrumentation a lot of the time like what you are. But there's a lot of similarities there.
100%. No, I'll definitely check them out. Yeah, I've never heard of them.
Yeah. So did you record everything yourself on the album?
Yeah. So the majority of the album was recorded by, I suppose by me, and also the guy who was helping out with the production of it and like the mixing. Okay. Daniel Natoli from A Sharp Studios.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I covered all obviously the vocals and the backing vox and all the keyboard based stuff and the piano, and he was on the other side helping out with like guitar, bass, and everything. So it sort of came together in a nice collab in the end.
Is that right? Yeah, I was going to ask you a question about Daniel, because he's mixed a ton of artists that have been distributed by Firestarters. So did you just effectively look him up, or did you get a reference to go and work with him, or how did that relationship come about?
Yeah, I was sort of looking come the sort of dawn of me wanting to write an album and get it produced, and I was looking up different, good but also I suppose relatively more affordable, studios and stuff in Sydney, and also one where I could get the help from from someone in charge, who knows what they're doing in terms of like the mixing side, be it Daniel in this case. And I sort of just found him and went for a sort of like couple of sessions where we just sort of sussed over what we'd be doing and the tracks and everything, and then we sort of agreed that it would be really cool. And yeah, that was sort of how it all started, I guess.
So you mentioned that he actually did some of the instrumentation as well, and I know that can be a bit of a tough thing to trust somebody else to do that when you're putting something like this together. But did you just tell him, look, this is what I need, this is how I want it to sound, or did you just give him a bit of creative license as well?
Yeah, well, for most of the sort of guitar parts that he ended up tracking, it was more a case of me writing out the chord charts or the notation of like the parts of the songs, for example, like guitar solos or chord progressions and stuff. And I guess that's where also like the conservatorium teachings come into handy, because I was able to like, you know, rustle that up and give it to him and stuff, and that really helped with the process of him knowing exactly what it was that I was very keen for and exactly how he would sort of perform that.
Gotcha. Yeah. And when you were crafting the songs, did you think that they turn out the way that they did, or was it a bit of an evolution in the studio for you?
I'd say definitely an evolution. Like, it was really cool. I mean, just the whole concept of starting out on, you know, virtual synth instruments and writing at home in your bedroom on like a MIDI keyboard, and then actually getting into the studio and getting like genuine guitars and drums and all that sort of stuff that then come together. It's such an awesome experience, because it's just like, it's almost as if what you write in your bedroom is sort of the roots as to what then is a tree, you know, to what later like a tree is built on, when all the sounds come together and it all becomes just like so much more real, you know?
Yeah, it does. You're not wrong. It can be quite scary at times too, can't it? Because you've put all this energy and effort into writing things, usually late at night and by yourself, and you're sort of considering different ideas and directions to take things. But then at the studio, it's, you know, shit's real, isn't it? You're there, you're paying for it. You've basically got to come up with a product. So, you're obviously pretty happy with the results, though, I take it. I mean, this is...
definitely.
This is a pretty good statement of intent, I think, moving forward for you.
100%. Yeah, there was definitely some moments like when in the studio, for example, as I was saying about how I would start originally with, you know, just virtual synth instruments on my computer. It's so easy to get caught up in how, you know, when you play something, it instantly sounds like pretty good, and you can quantize it, get it in time, get it in rhythm, whatever. And you get in the studio and you're sort of like, you start off with these sort of raw recordings from, you know, guitars or whatever it may be, that then later on end up sounding just like, yeah, bloody beautiful. But I mean, when you start with it, it's sort of more on the raw side. And I was so used to that at that point by just hearing these sort of slightly digitalized, perfected versions of what I would have preferred to be real. But like, I'd sort of been like, oh, that single semiquavers at a time and all this sort of stuff. But then when it actually came to it, it was just like, it was sweet. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much sort of post-production that goes into making like a full album. And like, by the time it was mixed and that whole journey, it was so rewarding, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you can tell all the energy and effort you've put into it, mate, because it's got a killer sound. And I think the mastering by Richard Lake is truly on point. So tell me about Richard. Did you select him, or was that something that came up in discussions with Daniel?
Yeah, it kind of came on discussion because he sort of, I think, manages and owns A Sharp Studios.
Okay.
And he was sort of the first choice to go to in terms of like, he knew all the gear. He was familiar with all the stuff that Daniel had been working on, who I suppose, like, you know, works very closely with him in some cases. So it was sort of like an easier way to get the best sound, because, you know, it just eliminated all the re-explanation of everything that had to go on. But definitely, yeah. So I was really, really happy with his output.
Did you give him any instructions specifically, or was it just a case of just make it sound as polished as possible? Because one of the key things that about the end result here is you can really hear all the instruments crystal clear, which is bloody hard to do. And I talk about it a lot on the podcast series because I get sent hundreds of new releases, singles, EPs, albums every year, and if there's one thing that I think is a deal breaker, it's bad production these days and mastering these days in 2019 and 20 and beyond. So that was obviously very... I mean, you can't polish a turd from the perspective if this has not been recorded correctly and mixed correctly, which Daniel's done a great job on. You really can't get the mastering right. But you must have... Were you shooting for it to be as clear as what it is, or was it a surprise to you that it was as crystal clear as what it is, man? Because it's all there. You can hear everything. You can isolate all of the instrumentation.
Yeah, definitely. I think I was incredibly like impressed. I mean, obviously I don't know like much as any of these people, but I was very impressed with how it ended up, just because like a lot of the original instrumentations and the parts that I went to A Sharp Studios with were so dense. I mean, if you look at the title track, like After Hours, All This Talk, it's by the time you get to the last chorus, there's like an entire like stadium crowd vox, like sort of counter melody going on over the top of a hook, which, you know, plays in the choruses and the hook of the song. Underneath the actual vocal melody at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's like some very dense orchestration. That was partly on my end, like just like, you know, writing stuff with a few too much, like, you know, a bit more massive intentions in mind than I probably should have had. But I think by through the whole process of mixing, I was just stoked that all the individual parts that I was originally hoping that could be heard were being able to be heard. Like you said, you know, that was a really cool thing to happen, I guess.
Look, typically I'll talk to an indie artist about getting played on Triple J, but I actually think your stuff's strong enough to get played on B105 or Today FM. Have you put any feelers out there to see if that's possible?
Yeah, I've so far looked a bit at like Triple J, because a lot of how indie artists can get out there, I suppose, is Triple J, as you said. But I'll be really keen to just get my music played anywhere and everywhere that I can. So that's a really good suggestion there. Thank you. I'll definitely have a more proper look at getting it on some different radio stations.
Yeah, I think so, man. I think definitely do it. There's enough grit there for it to appeal to genuine and real music fans, if you know what I'm saying, people like me. But at the same time, there's enough pop sheen across this that it can be acceptable to people driving in their BMWs to whatever shitty job they've got playing in the background. You know what I mean? So
yeah, no, definitely. Cheers. That's what I was kind of trying to get, to be honest, like with the songs in general. Like I was trying to have that exact sort of duality between, I suppose, something that people can relate to and sort of get on a more popular level, and also something slightly more, I guess, like, I don't want to say alternative, but you know what I mean? Like in terms of just like, there was that extra level of interest in each song that provided slightly more outside the, you know, more popular contemporary realm, I guess.
The other thing too, mate, is, and I know people probably don't pay much attention or care too much about album cover artwork these days, but you've done really well with yours here. Again, tell me about the concept. I'm really curious to understand exactly what your intention is behind the album cover art.
Yeah, so it's cool. I was sort of like, as soon as I sort of came to the realization that I wanted this whole album to be set to the tone of after hours and things that happen after hours, or thoughts that you may have after hours and all that sort of stuff. One of my friends told me about how like that whole long exposure effect on cameras can get this really cool like sort of blurred effect. And I thought, you know, it'd be cool if I could get something that almost could capture like when you walk into town or something and you see like all the lights in front of you, and it's sort of like that whole neon haze type vibe, you know. So I was like, got in contact with a friend, Luca Ward, who was a really cool photographer, and he worked for a while getting like, there were like a bunch of different things thrown out, because obviously it's pretty sort of and like sort of vague in terms of subject, and it's pretty ambiguous. And yeah, I guess sort of getting that right duality between ambiguous but also could mean whatever people put meaning into it as. And yeah, so I mean, we kind of ended up with that, and I was really happy with the final project, like the final piece, definitely.
Yeah, it's something that I think Radiohead would love to use for their music. That's what it reminded me of straight away. But I tell you what, mate, I've actually got to be honest and say that I think I prefer the. I understand your concept, and it's great what you've done there with the album, but the artwork that you went with for World Gone Mad, man, that's killer. I love that concept. Can you tell me about that?
Cheers. Yeah. That was like, actually, to be honest, like a simpler process. It was sort of a case of me thinking, oh, what's the song about? I was thinking, oh, the meaning's probably around sort of all this negativity that's being thrown out in on social media and in the news and everything, and just how the general populace has to just stay positive in the face of that in order to keep going on, essentially. So I was like, yeah, okay, World Gone Mad. Let's get something like a symbol of purity, or a symbol of sort of like hope or whatever, love, whatever, which I was thinking like a rose. That's kind of like the first thing that came to mind. And then I was thinking about how, as is with the human psyche, it was a bit like getting a bit all psychological and everything, but yes, as with sort of like thinking about things that are sort of can be bad in terms of negatively affecting that. And degradatory and all that stuff. And I thought, okay, like a cigarette lighter, that could be, fires, or it could be smoking, or it could be, whatever it may have connotations to be. And like a beer bottle dripping liquid, that could be, whatever it may be. And I was just thinking, those things, I suppose, like the most generic in terms of instantly effectual, thinking about things that can bring down that purity. And so, that combination together is kind of just like that symbol of keeping on, I guess. And all the things just around that bubble that can negatively affect that. But yeah, so that was kind of like the idea behind that cover.
Yeah, so just for the listener's perspective, I'll explain what's going on with this cover. So you've got a rose in front of a body of water, let's just say the ocean, and two people with cigarette lighters are lighting the rose leaves, and then at the same time, you've got this, what looks like a champagne bottle or a beer bottle, tipping
beer
product
bottle.
into it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there you go. Yeah, no, it's definitely unique, man. It actually, I'd really encourage you to use that for merch, actually.
Cheers, definitely. I've been really keen to get some more merch happening, so thank you. That's a really good idea, actually.
Yeah. Hey, I reckon, I'm definitely right because I went and checked this the other day, but I interview artists from all over the world, but in Australia, I've interviewed far less artists from Sydney than anywhere else in the country. Now, I know there's a scene down there, but it's such a tough place to live, yet alone bloody make music. But in terms of the scene, music scene itself, it's still very, fractured, divided. People in Sutherland area stay down there, and people in the North Shore stay in the North Shore. You know what I mean? Like, people aren't sort of going...
Yeah.
Is it still like that?
It's like a hard one. Like, I know everyone gives shit to the music scene in Sydney, but to be honest, I have to agree. I think a lot of what's happened, recently, especially with like the lockout laws and things like that, have, as you said, just sort of blown up what had been previously established in like the last sort of 30, 40 years. A lot of really cool like venues and things that shut down because of lack of funding or not being able to get enough money to actually stay afloat. So it's sort of like in this lull right now. I think the one thing that is getting better, though, is that, as you said, people from sort of regional areas are coming down more to Sydney. People from Sydney are doing more regional shows. And I don't know if you heard, probably lockout laws are getting abolished in January.
So I heard.
So I think that it's definitely going to make a big change. Like, already a lot of talk has been going on about, getting all these venues back and running, getting some more, cheaper middle ground type live venue spaces there. Because from my experience, even just starting gigging in Sydney, there's some insane bands out there in Sydney. There's some great talent, some great singer-songwriters, whatever genre as well. It's just the only difference is, I suppose, between something like Sydney and Melbourne is that whereas in Melbourne you have that whole sort of middle tier of venues where artists who are established but just not, relatively popular yet can book out and get people to come to. In Sydney, it's kind of like, you have a couple of small venues and then you move up to maybe like Enmore Theatre and then you move up to like, stadiums. So there's no sort of like middle ground. But I think that's definitely and slowly changing, which is really cool. It's really exciting, I guess.
Yeah, you've just confirmed something that I'd long suspected, which is that there are a ton of artists doing their thing in Sydney. There's just not the venues. There's just not the spaces for them to play.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
if there were the spaces and the places for them to play, see in Brisbane here, we've got the Valley, and every night of the week you can go and see a killer band. Really, you can just stumble into a venue and watch it, and then you can go and have dinner and trundle home, or go and drink if you want to keep on drinking, kicking on. But Sydney's not like that, is it? I mean, I was saying in my podcast beforehand that the interview beforehand that most of my audience is actually overseas, so I try to give them a bit of an insight is to the Australian scene and culture, if you like. And Sydney is the one city just about everybody in the world could name is an Australian city, but it's the one scene. I think it spawned Australia's best bands, in my view. AC/DC, In Excess, Midnight Oil.
True.
Cold Chisel really made their mark there. I know they're an Adelaide band, but they really became a band and took and the icons that they are in Sydney.
Definitely.
But it's definitely a tough town to get there. There's almost 6 million people or something. That's the thing that I don't think people realise either, is how many bloody people there are in Sydney. But, people are still people insofar as they want to make music and they want to create. But if there's not the venues and the outlets for them to do so, there's no Fortitude Valley in Sydney. It used to be the Cross, but that was also a really rough spot too. I used to go out in the Cross myself. Never had any dramas there, but you could sense there was that edge there. And I think a lot of people don't, suburbanites, if you like, don't really want to expose themselves to that a lot of the time. So suburban venues are the way to go, man. And these bloody lockout laws and also a few good ones in Sydney City. I know there's Frankie's Pizza there, and I flew down for a gig at Crowbar. Yeah, they're there.
Exactly, that's the thing. Like, they're there. It's just, I suppose, is like getting it more publicized and getting it out there that they are venues there. Like, people come out to them, but as I said, sort of with the whole, lots of bands, not enough venues. If I feel like there were a few more venues that were affordable, that were like to the middle, like, you know, maybe 200 to 500 people, then there'd be a lot more gigs just happening in Sydney. And I'm not optimistic. I reckon, like, with these lockout law abolishments, like, it'll be sweet.
The only other issue in Sydney is the price of real estate and renting, meaning that's the big barrier there. It's nowhere near as expensive up here, and probably the same in Melbourne. But I think that's going to be the big barrier to entry. That's going to be the new obstacle moving forward, is because of the property prices in Sydney are just insane, right? For what you get, there's no value for money. But if you want to set up a venue and look, 500 people, that's, God, how big is that? I don't know how many squares that's going to be, but it's quite a lot.
No, exactly.
And you sort of
think,
God,
a good point.
Where would they put it? You know, and that's But are you whereabouts are you? Without naming the suburb, are you north side or south side? Whereabouts are you in Sydney?
Yeah, I'm kind of like sort of inner city towards, I guess, like around sort of Star City, to be honest.
Oh,
sort
shit.
of like not that far. Yeah, so
city. Yeah,
that's
right.
the one thing I was going to mention is that it's just kind of whack because, you know, as you said with the cross, everyone was like, oh, we'll the lockout laws, it'll abolish all crime in the cross. But of course, Star City is the only place right now that's completely 24 hours for, you know, obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And it's almost like just pushed all the crime over there, I feel. I think...
You're right.
Yeah, a lot of the thing with the lockout laws is people would sort of just get kicked out of venues and be just roaming around with nowhere to go, whatever. Like the public transport wasn't necessarily working to their area, and that's, I think, a lot of the reason why quite a lot of fights and the whole thing with the coward punch and all those incidents were kind of popping up. But yeah, a lot of it just sort of seems to just move over to the Star. So I think at least by getting rid of these lockout laws, even if it's completely out of the sphere of talking about venues and you know, possibilities for bands getting into these venues, I think it's actually going to slightly help that local, like, sort of centralization of the violence. Because if people are just dispersed around, and it's going to be a lot less worse than they all just leaving the Star, you know, getting a bad return on their $20 bets or something.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think the lockout laws were a massive. I definitely feel for the family who lost, you know, they lost their son to an act of violence, a coward punch, but then the brother killed himself, you know, in despair over what happened. But I totally feel for the family, believe me, I do. But I think the whole thing was an overreaction from the perspective that they blamed King's Cross for it, as opposed to blamed this fuckwit. And the way he was probably brought up, you know, it has nothing to do with Sydney itself as a city. It's this
I agree.
Dickhead, you know, who was just... This guy had a history of walking around picking fights. You know, it just...
exactly.
So happened it was in the Cross. I mean, if it happened at Penrith, what are they going to do, shut down Penrith? You know, like, I mean, this is the thing.
I think, this is a completely non-related example, but in just like of a lot smaller scale... like around the area I live, we get these, you know, passes to get free parking outside the streets, right? And so a couple of times, these random guys, no one knows who, would come around, smash people's windshields, and grab these things. And because obviously, you know, free parking in a city is you know, you know, everyone wants that. And so as a response, instead of, you know, trying to find out who did it or trying to sort of tell people, or make sure you have these things inside, whatever, they just got rid of them. And so now, I mean, you know, it's a whole, like, first world problem type thing. But in a sense, I think that's sort of the same type of completely getting rid of or changing, or as you said, blaming, like such a larger related thing, like a suburb or like a
they make everybody responsible for it. So one person does it, and we're all responsible. You know, you as a Sydney sider are then responsible for it. Like, how the hell can I stop it? You know, what am I supposed to do? Tell him off if I see him? As if you're going to see him or her who does it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny one.
I think it's changing now. I think gradually it's changing, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, well, mate, you've got a heck of an album here to promote, mate. So that's my final question for you. Is You do have a live band around you, is that right? And you're going to take it on the road and do some gigs?
100%, yeah. I got these 5 guys behind me who I met at the Con.
Wow.
And just we did our first like main launch for the album last Saturday night. And we're just I'm going away a bit in January, but definitely when I get back, like mid-Feb, I'm super keen with these guys to sort of just take it as far as I can go in terms of the album. We'll get some like proper covers going. You know, we'll take it, you know, maybe regionally. And just get it out there as much as can do, I suppose. Yeah,
definitely come up here, mate. There's a great scene up here, as I'm sure you're aware. But your music,
100%.
would go really well here. Especially just talking to you, you've got a great attitude, and people appreciate that, man. You know, they want to know that there's someone that they can relate to up on stage. I think that's the big difference between Brisbane and some of the other cities in Australia, is that people actually want to talk to you after the gig. They're not dickheads either. They actually just want they're curious,
Yeah.
a bit like I am. You know, just that I've got a podcast series so I can ask questions. But I think you'll find that a lot of people up here will be like that. So hopefully you come up, mate, and I'll be in the audience when you do.
Definitely, man. Cheers. I really appreciate it.
Cool, man. Just before I let you go, you've got this album out, sorry, but where can people buy it? If they want to buy physical, mate, can they get in touch with you through Facebook, or how can they do that?
Definitely. I mean, like, in terms of physical, like a CD or anything, I think on Bandcamp, I've got the album there, but I think that's got hyperlinks to purchase of a physical CD sale.
Yep.
And also, I'm about to put up on like my Linktree, which is sort of like the website that hosts all the different hyperlinks to different social medias and whatnot. A direct link to like a physical CD purchase, which I'm sort of on the lookout for getting a website made, but that's it's a whole other can of worms, I guess.
No, fair enough, mate. Yeah, well, look, this has been a fantastic chat. What I'll do from here, if you're comfortable with everything we've spoken about, I certainly am. I'll just put it up as it is, and I'll just put it on Facebook and tag you in. How does that sound?
Awesome. Yeah, perfect. Cheers, man.
Killer, mate. I'll try and get it done by tomorrow, mate. So look out for a round.
No worries. Yeah, just give me a buzz and she'll be sweet.
Sweet. All right, mate. Thanks for the chat. Been a good one.
Cheers. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
No worries, mate. Good luck with it.
Cheers, man. Have a good one.
You too, man. Catcha. You've been listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast series that syndicates for the A-List Online, and my name is Andrew Buckeye-Smith. That interview subject was Gaba Wright from Sydney. There you go. Thanks so much for listening.